A senior Russian military commander has been targeted in a bold daylight attack in the heart of the capital, signaling a dramatic and personal escalation in Ukraine's campaign to bring the war home to the Russian leadership. Lieutenant General Alexander Viktorovich Kochanov, a high-ranking officer within the Russian General Staff, survived an attempted assassination when an explosive-laden drone struck his official vehicle as it traversed the Mozhayskoye highway on the western outskirts of Moscow. The attack, which occurred during the morning commute, resulted in a violent explosion that severely damaged the armored sedan, injured the general's driver and a bodyguard, and sent shockwaves through the Russian security apparatus. While the Kremlin swiftly announced that General Kochanov was recovering from non-life-threatening injuries, the successful strike against a moving target in a heavily defended area represents a significant operational leap for Ukrainian intelligence and special forces. This is not an attack on distant oil infrastructure or a static military base. It is a precision strike aimed directly at the human architecture of Russia's war command, executed within the symbolic and physical perimeter of the Russian state's power. The mechanics of the operation reveal a sophisticated and patient intelligence effort. According to analyses of publicly available traffic camera footage and satellite imagery, the attack was likely a coordinated effort involving multiple layers of planning. General Kochanov's vehicle, while armored, was traveling on a predictable route between a known residence and a high-security military command center. The drone employed was not the long-range fixed-wing model typically used for strikes on infrastructure, but a smaller, commercially modified quadcopter or a custom-built loitering munition capable of hovering and diving at a specific target. This suggests the attack cell had precise, real-time intelligence on the general's movements, potentially from human sources or through the interception of communications. The drone was likely launched from a concealed location within the Moscow region, navigating a complex urban airspace cluttered with buildings and potential electronic countermeasures. Its successful detonation on the vehicle's roof indicates either a shaped charge warhead designed to penetrate armor or a devastatingly accurate strike on a less protected section. The Russian security services' failure to either detect the drone's launch, intercept it en route, or disrupt its guidance system points to a concerning vulnerability, even in the capital's tightened security posture. The global significance of this event cannot be overstated. It fundamentally alters the perceived rules of engagement and the geography of vulnerability in this conflict. For over 2 years, the war's violence, while brutal and extensive, has been largely contained within Ukraine's borders, with exceptions for cross-border artillery duels and long-range strikes. The targeting of a specific individual from the Russian military elite in Moscow itself collapses that remaining conceptual boundary. It demonstrates that Ukraine possesses not just the tactical capability to strike deep inside Russia, but the operational intelligence to track, target, and attempt to eliminate key figures in the chain of command. This shifts the conflict towards a shadow war of high-value targeting, a realm previously associated with major intelligence agencies like the CIA or Mossad. For nations observing the conflict, particularly those with unresolved territorial disputes or facing non-state actor threats, the attack is a case study in how asymmetric warfare and commercially available technology can be fused to challenge a conventional military power's sense of security at its very core. It underscores a new era where senior officials in an aggressor state may not be immune from the consequences of a war they are waging abroad. Historically, this event finds precedent in targeted killings and decapitation strikes, but its context is uniquely modern. During the Chechen Wars, Russian commanders were targeted within conflict zones, but rarely in Moscow. The Soviet-era KGB conducted operations against dissidents abroad, but this is a wartime strike by a defending nation against a military target in the aggressor's capital. The closest parallels lie in targeted drone warfare as practiced by the United States in the Middle East, but with the roles reversed. A conventionally weaker state employing similar tactics against a permanent member of the UN Security Council on its own soil. This attack also continues a pattern that began with the assassination of journalist Daria Dugina in 2022 and the killing of war blogger Vladlen Tatarsky in 2023, but with a stark escalation in the rank and official status of the target. It marks the culmination of a trend where the battlefield has become boundless, and the instruments of war, small drones, decentralized intelligence networks, and digital surveillance have become democratized and terrifyingly precise. The immediate political implications within the Russian Federation are severe and multifaceted. Firstly, the attack is a profound embarrassment for the FSB, the Federal Protective Service, and military counterintelligence. Their primary mandate is to protect the state and its key figures from such threats. A successful strike in Moscow against a general staff officer suggests either catastrophic intelligence failure, internal corruption where security details were leaked, or a level of Ukrainian penetration previously considered implausible. This will inevitably trigger purges, recriminations, and a further tightening of the security dragnet around the political and military elite. Secondly, it exposes fissures within the power structure. General Kokhanov was reportedly a staff officer involved in planning and logistics, not a frontline commander. His targeting suggests Ukrainian intelligence is prioritizing officials responsible for the systemic functioning of the war machine, indicating a strategic shift from tactical disruption to managerial decapitation. For President Vladimir Putin, this incident is a direct challenge to his promise of stability and sovereignty. It will likely empower hardline factions who argue for even more brutal tactics in Ukraine and for declaring a formal state of war to enable total mobilization of society and security services. The political narrative of a controlled special military operation is now untenable. The war has literally arrived at the gates of the general staff, is less than end of thinking, is greater than part two. The social consequences within Russia will be characterized by a potent mixture of heightened anxiety, intensified propaganda, and suppressed discussion. For the general public, particularly in Moscow and other major cities, the attack shatters any lingering illusion of detachment from the conflict. The war is no longer a distant news item from Donbass or a reason for patriotic rallies. It is a tangible threat that can incinerate a car on a highway used by thousands daily. This breeds a deep-seated personal sense of vulnerability that state media cannot easily assuage. The official response will be a dual narrative. On one hand, celebrating the general's survival and the resilience of the nation. On the other, vilifying Ukraine and the West as terrorist actors, thereby justifying further domestic crackdowns and harsher measures in the war. This narrative aims to channel public fear into anger and renewed support for the regime's security apparatus. However, beneath the surface, the incident may accelerate a silent, internal emigration among the educated and connected classes who now perceive the risks as both personal and systemic. The social contract, already strained by mobilization and economic decline, is further burdened by the explicit threat of political violence at home, pushing society toward a more hardened, securitized, and paranoid norm. Internationally, reactions are split along familiar geopolitical fault lines, but with heightened concern. Western governments will maintain official silence or issue carefully worded statements that neither condemn nor endorse the strike, reiterating general support for Ukraine's right to self-defense while avoiding any appearance of endorsing assassination. Privately, intelligence agencies will be conducting frantic assessments of the operational methodology, seeing both opportunity and peril. The opportunity lies in the demonstrated degradation of Russian security and command integrity, the peril in the potential for uncontrolled escalation. NATO officials will likely express renewed behind-the-scenes concerns about the Kremlin's response and the risks of the conflict, spiraling into a cycle of retaliatory targeted killings that could expand to include Western officials. In contrast, Russia will use the attack to rally its allies and lobby the United Nations, framing it as undeniable proof of state terrorism requiring global condemnation. For nations like China and India, the event is deeply unsettling, demonstrating how advanced drone technology and hybrid warfare can destabilize a major power internally. It may prompt these countries to reassess their own domestic security protocols for senior leadership, while maintaining their calls for dialogue, albeit with a renewed sense that the conflict is entering an even more dangerous and unpredictable phase. Expert military and security analysis of the attack focuses on several groundbreaking aspects. Firstly, it highlights the evolution of Ukrainian military intelligence, GUR, and special forces from a supportive arm to a primary offensive instrument capable of executing complex kill chain operations deep inside heavily defended territory. The operation required signals intelligence to track the general, human intelligence to confirm movements and patterns of life, technical expertise to modify and arm the drone, and local clandestine cells to launch it. This denotes a fully matured, decentralized network. Secondly, the technological implication is significant. The use of a small, potentially commercially sourced drone bypasses traditional air defense systems designed to track missiles and aircraft. Moscow's extensive electronic warfare capabilities, reputed to be among the world's best, were evidently either absent, ineffective, or bypassed in this instance. This raises alarming questions for all modern militaries about defending against swarms of intelligent, low-cost drones in urban environments. Finally, from a strategic studies perspective, the attack represents the application of effect-based operations at the highest level. So, using a minimal resource to achieve a disproportionate psychological and organizational effect, potentially paralyzing parts of the Russian command structure through fear and suspicion. Economically, the direct impact is negligible, but the indirect effects are corrosive. There is no refinery offline, no bridge destroyed. However, the attack injects a new form of risk premium into the Russian system. It signals to the bureaucratic and corporate elite, the managers of Russia's sanctioned economy, that their personal safety may be contingent on their role in the war effort. This could accelerate capital flight among the discreet, wealthy, and deepen the sense of isolation for the ruling class. Furthermore, the state will now be compelled to invest billions of additional rubles into personal security details, advanced counter-drone technology for urban centers, and internal surveillance, diverting funds from other pressing needs. The economic cost lies in the reinforcement of a garrison state, where resources are funneled into security at the expense of productivity and innovation, further entrenching Russia's long-term economic decline. Looking forward, the aftermath of this attack sets a new and perilous baseline for the conflict. Retaliation from Russia is not a possibility, but a certainty. It will likely be disproportionate and could take several forms. A renewed missile campaign targeting Ukrainian presidential and security administration buildings in Kyiv, attempted targeted killings of Ukrainian senior officials, or even more brutal frontal assaults on the battlefield intended to deliver a punitive demonstration of force. The internal crackdown within Russia will intensify, with increased surveillance, arrests of suspected dissidents, or individuals with Ukrainian ties, and a further stifling of any independent information space. For Ukraine, the successful operation, even if it did not kill its target, validates this high-risk strategy. It is likely to continue and expand, potentially targeting other figures in the military-industrial complex or political establishment. This establishes a dangerous tit-for-tat cycle of targeted violence that exists parallel to the conventional war. The international community's ability to mediate or control this new front is virtually non-existent. The war has entered a more intimate, shadowy, and unpredictable chapter where the boundaries between battlefield and homeland, soldier and civilian official, and conventional and clandestine warfare have been irrevocably blurred. The sound of a drone over Moscow may become as emblematic of this conflict as the sound of artillery in the Donbass, a constant reminder that in a war of this nature, there are ultimately no safe zones for those who wage it. Part 2. The political reverberations from the attack on General Kochanov will be profound and enduring within the walls of the Kremlin and the Ministry of Defense. This event is not merely a security failure. It is a direct challenge to the internal credibility of the Siloviki, the powerful security services that form the backbone of Putin's regime. The Federal Security Service, FSB, tasked with domestic counterintelligence and preventing exactly this kind of operation, faces its most severe crisis of competence in years. The General Staff, already reeling from the loss of numerous generals on the battlefield in the war's early stages, now must confront the reality that even staff officers in Moscow are not safe. This will inevitably trigger a vicious cycle of purges, scapegoating, and internal investigations that could paralyze sections of the bureaucracy with fear and suspicion. The hunt for leaks or moles will become an overriding priority, potentially damaging operational efficiency as officers become more concerned with covering their tracks than executing their duties. For President Putin, the incident underscores a dangerous erosion of control. It empowers the most hawkish, paranoid factions within his circle, who will argue for lifting all remaining constraints on military action, perhaps including calls for broader mobilization or the explicit designation of Ukraine as a terrorist state, a legal move that could be used to justify even more extreme retaliation. The political narrative must now awkwardly reconcile the image of an omnipotent restoring Russia with the footage of a smoldering general's car on a Moscow highway. Socially, the attack introduces a new and deeply personal variable into the Russian public's perception of the war. For the urban professional class in major cities, particularly Moscow and St. Petersburg, the conflict has largely been a distant abstraction, punctuated by patriotic news segments and the subtle pressures of sanctions. The strike shatters that comfortable distance. It makes tangible the concept of blowback, the idea that the violence exported to Ukraine can return precisely targeted to the streets of the capital. While state television will frame the general as a hero and the attack as a desperate terrorist act, the underlying message received by the populace is one of vulnerability. This does not necessarily translate into street protests. The risks are far too high, but it fertilizes a climate of quiet anxiety and fatalism. It reinforces a tendency towards social atomization and withdrawal as people focus on personal security and navigating an increasingly difficult economic landscape. The social contract, where political passivity was exchanged for stability and gradual improvement in living standards, is now being rewritten in real time. Passivity is demanded in exchange for safety, yet the state's ability to guarantee that safety is now openly in question. This dynamic may further accelerate the brain drain that began with the partial mobilization, as those with means and mobility seek exits, not just from economic hardship, but from a perceived landscape of growing physical risk. The international reaction will be characterized by stark dichotomy and diplomatic caution. Western nations, while likely assessing the operation as a significant intelligence coup for Kyiv, will publicly maintain a stance of studied neutrality. Official statements will avoid any endorsement of targeted killings, reiterating support for Ukraine's broader right to self-defense under the UN Charter, while emphasizing the need to protect civilian life. Behind closed doors, however, there will be acute concern about escalation dynamics. The strike represents a crossing of a Rubicon in the shadow war, moving from infrastructure and symbolic targets to individual command figures. Western intelligence agencies will be tasked with urgently modeling potential Russian responses and preparing for scenarios that could include retaliatory strikes on Western officials or assets. Given the Kremlin's propensity to accuse NATO of direct involvement, for Moscow's international partners like China and Iran, the attack serves as a sobering case study. Beijing, while continuing its no-limits rhetorical partnership, will be privately alarmed by the demonstration of vulnerability in a fellow authoritarian state's security apparatus. It may lead to increased Chinese scrutiny of its own domestic security measures for senior officials. At the United Nations, Russia will demand condemnation, but will likely only secure it from a core group of allies like Belarus, North Korea, and Syria, further highlighting its isolation from the broader international community. From an expert analytical perspective, the operation against General Kochanov represents a maturation of hybrid warfare tactics into a new phase of personalized, high-value targeting. Military analysts note that Ukraine has effectively combined three distinct layers of modern conflict: traditional human intelligence, human networks, likely dormant for years, digital surveillance and signals intelligence, SIGINT, to track patterns of life, and agile, commercially available technology, CAT, for lethal delivery. This fusion creates a threat that is incredibly difficult to defend against, as it bypasses traditional military defenses and operates within the civilian landscape. Security specialists emphasize that Russia's failure points to a critical gap in counter-drone defense for personal protection details. While military bases may have jamming guns and electronic warfare suites, securing the daily movements of thousands of mid to high-level officials across a vast urban area is a logistical nightmare. The attack proves that the democratization of precision strike capability is now complete. It is no longer the sole purview of superpower intelligence agencies. Furthermore, strategic analysts point out that such operations aim to induce systemic paralysis. The cost is not just one general, but the imposition of a security regime so burdensome and distrustful that it hinders the entire chain of command's operational tempo and cohesion. Economically, the implications are indirect but contribute to a worsening climate for stability and investment. The immediate market reaction may be muted, but the long-term signal to the remaining international business community and domestic elites is profoundly negative. It underscores that Russia is no longer a safe authoritarian state with predictable risks, but a country engaged in a war that is penetrating its most secured spaces. This reinforces capital flight and makes the prospect of repatriating funds or attracting any foreign expertise, even from friendly nations, even more remote. The state will be forced to allocate further resources to personal security, VIP transportation upgrades, and urban anti-drone systems, diverting funds from already strained social and infrastructure budgets. The attack thus acts as a force multiplier for sanctions, deepening the economic isolation and autarky by making the environment for any normal economic activity appear perilous. Looking forward, the aftermath establishes a dangerous new paradigm. Retaliation from Russia is inevitable and will be calibrated to demonstrate restored deterrence. This could manifest as a renewed campaign against Ukrainian political leadership, attempts to target Ukrainian intelligence officials, or spectacular long-range strikes on decision-making centers in Kyiv. The internal crackdown within Russia will intensify with travel restrictions on officials, increased electronic monitoring, and a further consolidation of power in the hands of those who can guarantee security through sheer repression. For Ukraine, despite the risks, the operation will be seen as a strategic success, proving that the Russian homeland is not a sanctuary. This greenlights further operations of this kind, potentially expanding the target list to include figures in the arms, procurement, bureaucracy, or political orchestrators of the war. The conflict is thereby propelled into a cycle of personalized vengeance, a shadow war mirroring the artillery duel on the front lines. This development makes the concept of negotiations, already remote, even more complex, as personal survival calculations enter the equation of command. The war has become not only a battle for territory, but a grim contest of endurance and nerve, where the psychological impact of a single drone in Moscow may ultimately weigh as heavily as the capture of a village in Donbass.